This video is not a lecture, but rather my reading of several creation stories. Unfortunately, Edpuzzle does not support making questions on reading material, so I need to turn the stories into a video format, but I'll paste the text on the screen in case you'd like to read that as well as listen. This is a synthesis of several stories from the Cherokee, who were the native people of northern Georgia and Alabama, western North Carolina, central and eastern Tennessee, and Kentucky. The stories were told by James Mooney of the Bureau of American Ethnology in the late 1800s by older Cherokee men in western North Carolina. The principal storyteller was Ayunini Swimmer, who was born in 1835 and never spoke English, although he served as sergeant in the Confederate infantry in the Civil War. He died in 1899. The story of corn and medicine. The earth began as nothing but water and darkness, and all the animals were in Galun Lati, above the stone vault that makes up the sky. Eventually, Galun Lati became so crowded that the animals needed more room, and they wanted to move down to earth. Not knowing what was below the water, they sent down the water beetle to explore. Water beetle dove below the water and eventually came back with some mud from below. That mud grew and grew, and finally it became the island that we call Earth. This island of Earth is suspended at its four corners from ropes that hang down from the sky, and legend has it that someday the ropes will break and the Earth will sink back into the water. Because it grew from mud, the new Earth was very soft. Many of the birds flew down to explore the new land, but it was too wet for them to stay. Finally, Buzzard flew down, hoping it was dry, but the earth was still wet. Buzzard searched and searched, especially in the Cherokee country, and finally he became so tired that his wings flapped against the ground. His wings dug valleys where they hit the ground and turned up mountains where they pulled away, leaving the rugged country of the Cherokee. Eventually the earth was dry and the animals moved down. There still was no light, however, and so animals set the sun passing from east to west just over their heads. With the sun so close, many of the animals were burned, giving the red crawfish its crimson color. The animals raised the sun again and again until it was high enough that all could survive. When the plants and animals first came to Earth, they were told to stay awake for 7 nights, as in the Cherokee medicine ceremony. The animals all stayed awake the first night, and many stayed awake the next few nights, but only the owl and the panther and a couple of others stayed awake all 7 nights. They were given the ability to see at night, and so to hunt at night when the others are asleep. The same thing happened among the trees, and only the cedar, pine, spruce, holly, and laurel stayed awake all 7 nights, which is why they can stay green all year when the others lose their leaves. Humans came after the animals. At first they multiplied rapidly, and the first woman gave birth every 7 days. Eventually there were so many of them that it seemed they might not all survive, and since then, to this day, each woman has been able to have just 1 child each year. Among these early people were a man and woman named Kanati and Silu, whose names meant the lucky hunter and corn, respectively. Kanati would go hunting and invariably return with the game, which Silu would prepare by the stream near their home. She would always return home with baskets of corn, which she would pound to make meal for bread. Kanati and Silu had a little boy, and he would play by the stream. Eventually they realized that he was playing with another little boy who had arisen from the blood of their game washed by the stream. With their son's help, they caught the other boy, and eventually he lived with them like he was their own son, although he was called the Wild Boy. Kanati brought home game whenever he went hunting, and one day the 2 boys decided to follow him. They followed him into the mountains until he came to a large rock, which he pulled aside to reveal a cave from which a buck emerged. Kanati shot the buck, and after covering the cave, he headed home. The boys got home before him and didn't reveal what they had learned, but a few days later they returned to the rock. With a struggle, they pulled it aside, and had great fun watching the deer come out of the cave. They lost track of what they were doing, however, and soon all sorts of game animals, rabbit and turkeys and partridges and buffalo, and all escaped from the cave. Kanati saw all these animals coming down the mountain and knew what the boys must have done, and he went up the mountain after them. He opened 4 jars in the cave, and from them came fleas and lice and gnats and bedbugs that attacked the boys. He sent them home, hoping he could find some of the dispersed game for the supper. Thus it is that people must now hunt for game. The boys went home, and Silu told them there would be no meat for dinner. However, she went to the storehouse for food and told the boys to wait while she did so. They followed her instead to the storehouse and watched her go inside. She put down her basket and then rubbed her stomach, and the basket was partly full with corn. Then she rubbed her sides, and it was full to the top with beans. Watching through a crack in the storehouse wall, the boys saw all this. Silu knew that they would have seen her, but she went ahead and fixed them a last meal. Then she and Kanati explained that because their secrets were revealed, they would die, and with them would end the easy life they had known. However, Silu told them to drag her body 7 times around in a circle in front of their house, and then to drag her 7 times over the soil inside the circle. And if they stayed up all night to watch, in the morning they would have a crop of corn. The boys, however, only cleared a few spots, and they only dragged her body over it twice, which is why corn only grows in certain places on the earth. They did sit up all night, though, and in the morning the corn was grown, and still it is grown today, although now it takes half a year. In these early days, the plants, the animals, and the people all lived together as friends. As the people multiplied, however, the animals had less room to roam, and they were either slaughtered for food or trampled under the humans' feet. Finally, the animals had a council to discuss what to do. The bears experimented with using bows and arrows to fight back, but they concluded that they would have to cut off their claws to use the bows. The deer held a council and decided to send rheumatism to any hunter who killed a deer without asking its pardon for having done so. When a deer is shot by a hunter, the fleet and silent little deer, leader of the deer, runs to the blood-stained spot to ask the spirit of the killed deer if the hunter prayed for pardon for his affront. If the answer is no, little deer follows the trail of blood and inflicts the hunter with rheumatism so that he is crippled. The fish and reptiles likewise met and resolved that the people would suffer from dreams in which snakes twined around them. The birds and smaller animals and insects all met too and talked long into the night about how they had suffered from the humans. Eventually, they created all sorts of new diseases to afflict humans, which have since become a scourge to the animals' oppressors. After this, the plants met, and they resolved that something must be done to counteract what the animals had done. That is why so many trees and shrubs and herbs, and even the mosses, provide remedies for diseases. It was thus that medicine first came into the world to counteract the revenge of the animals. This Norse story of the origin of the earth, sky, and humanity is paraphrased from Snorri Sturluson's Edda, as translated by Anthony Falks. Sturluson lived in Iceland from 1179 to 1241, and he apparently composed the Edda as a compilation of traditional stories and verse. Many of the verses he included appear to date from the times when Norse sagas were conveyed only in spoken form by Viking bards. Odin and Ymir. In the beginning of time, there was nothing, neither sand nor sea nor cool waves. Neither the heaven nor earth existed. Instead, long before the earth was made, Niflheim was made, and in it a spring gave rise to 12 rivers. To the south was Muspel, a region of heat and brightness guarded by Surt, a giant who carried a flaming sword. To the north was frigid Ginnungagap, where the rivers froze and all was ice. Where the sparks and warm winds of Muspel reached the south side of the frigid Ginnungagap, the ice thawed and dripped, and from the drips thickened and formed the shape of a man. His name was Ymir, the first of and ancestor of the frost giants. As the ice dripped more, it formed a cow, and from her teats flowed 4 rivers of milk that fed Ymir. The cow fed on the salt of the rime ice, and as she licked, a man's head began to emerge. By the end of the 3rd day of her licking, the whole man had emerged, and his name was Buri. He had a son named Bor, who married Bestla, a daughter of one of the giants. Bor and Bestla had 3 sons, one of whom was Odin, the most powerful of the gods. Ymir was a frost giant, but not a god, and eventually he turned to evil. After a struggle between the giant and the young gods, Bor's 3 sons killed Ymir. So much blood flowed from his wounds that all the frost giants were drowned but one, who survived only by building an ark for himself and his family. Bor's sons dragged Ymir's immense body to the center of Ginnungagap, and from him they made the earth. Ymir's blood became the sea, his bones became the rocks and crags, and his hair became the trees. Bor's son took Ymir's skull, and with it made the sky. In it they fixed sparks and molten slag from Muspel to make the stars and other sparks they set to move in paths just below the sky. They threw Ymir's brains into the sky and made the clouds. The earth is a disk, and they set up Ymir's eyelashes to keep the giants at the edge of that disk. On the seashore, Bor's sons found 2 logs and made people out of them. One son gave them breath and life, the second son gave them consciousness and movement, and the third gave them faces, speech, hearing, and sight. From this man and woman came all humans thereafter, just as all the gods were descended from the sons of Bor. Odin and his brothers had set up the sky and stars, but otherwise they left the heavens unlit. Long afterwards, one of the descendants of those first 2 people that the brother created had 2 children. Those 2 children were so beautiful that their father named the son Moon and the daughter Sol. The gods were jealous already, and when they heard of the father's arrogance, they pulled the brother and sister up to the sky and set them to work. Sol drives the chariot that carries the sun across the skies, and she drives so fast across the skies of the Northland because she is chased by a giant wolf each day. Moon likewise takes a course across the sky each night, but not so swiftly because he is not so harried. The gods did leave one pathway from earth to heaven. That is the bridge that appears in the sky as a rainbow, and its perfect arc and brilliant colors are a sign of its origin with the gods. It nonetheless will not last forever because it will break when the men of Muspel try to cross it into heaven. This creation story is from Genesis 2:4 to 3:24 of the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. Extensive analysis of its style and content have led scholars of the Bible to conclude that the story was written in about the 10th century BC. That was around the time of King Solomon's reign and in a time when Israel was a powerful nation. In contrast, the story in Genesis 1:1 to 2:3 was written 3 or 4 centuries later and under very different circumstances. The author of the story in Genesis 2:4 to 3:24 is known to scholars as J. That is because J referred to the Creator as Yahweh. The paraphrase below maintains J's use of the Hebrew name Yahweh rather than the English word God. The latter is, after all, only a derivative of the German word Gott, and is in no way tied to the Hebrew language of the Old Testament or even the Greek of the New Testament. Some scholars have considered J the more primitive or rural of the 2 authors of the creation stories in Genesis. Others are more generous and characterize J as a poet rather than a priest. J was probably recording his or her people's oral traditions in written form. Certainly J's story is a more human story of temptation and punishment than the austere story written later by the author known as P, and J's creator is more anthropomorphic. In J's story, the humans that are created have names. To English speakers, Adam and Eve are just names, but Adam meant man in ancient Hebrew, and may also have been a play on Adamah, the Hebrew word for earth or clay. Eve was the word for life. Yahweh, On the day that Yahweh made the heavens and the earth, the land was dry and barren until a mist came up from the earth and wetted the land. Then Yahweh took dust from the earth and shaped it in the form of a man, and he breathed life into that form, and it came to life. Yahweh created a garden in a place called Eden. In this garden, Yahweh placed all the trees that bear fruit, including the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. A river flowed out of Eden and watered the garden, and there it divided to become 4 rivers that flowed to the 4 corners of the world. Yahweh put the man there and instructed him to cultivate the garden and to eat of whatever fruit he liked, except for fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Then Yahweh decided that the man should not be alone, and that he should have a helper. Thus Yahweh made the beasts of the field and the birds of the air, and the man gave a name to each of them. However, none were fit to be his helper, so Yahweh made the man fall into a deep sleep, and took one of the man's ribs, and he made it into a woman. The man was Adam, and the woman's name was Eve. In the garden was a snake, and the snake persuaded the woman that she could eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil without dying, and that eating the fruit would give her Yahweh's knowledge of good and evil. She ate the fruit, and she gave some to the man too. For the first time they were ashamed of being naked, and so they made aprons for themselves. When the man and woman heard Yahweh in the garden, they hid from him. But Yahweh called them out and asked why they had hidden. The man explained that they hid because of their scanty clothing. Yahweh asked the man how they knew to be ashamed of nudity, and if they had eaten the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The man explained that the woman had eaten of the fruit and given him some too. When Yahweh asked the woman, she explained that the snake had beguiled her into eating the fruit. Yahweh said to the snake, "Because of what you have done, you are cursed more than any other animal, and you will have to crawl on your belly in the dust, and you will be beaten by the offspring of this woman." To the woman, Yahweh said, "You will be cursed with great pain in giving birth to children, yet you will have the desire to reproduce, and your husband will rule you." Finally, to the man, Yahweh said, "Because of what you have done, the ground is cursed, and you will never eat of this fruit again. You will grow plants and fields and eat bread until you die, until you become the dust from which you were made." Then Yahweh said, "This man has become like us, knowing good and evil. Next he will seek the tree of life and try to live forever." Therefore Yahweh made the man and the woman clothing and drove them out of the Garden of Eden, and he placed a winged, half-human, half-lion creature at the garden's gate to keep them out. Much of this account of the origin of the earth and its divinities comes from the Theogony, written by Hesiod, a Greek poet estimated to have lived around 700 BC, and thus roughly at the time of Homer. The Theogony is mostly concerned with the origin of the Greek gods. Thus, the origin of the earth, or of the earth personified by deities, that is given here in the first 2 paragraphs below, comes from just lines 115 to 134 of the Theogony, which is 1,030 lines long. The rest of the Theogony, like the rest of the account below, is concerned with the deities and their interactions. An accompanying chart titled The Ancient Greek Gods shows the genealogy of some of those deities. The last 2 paragraphs of this account come from Book 1 of Metamorphoses from the Roman poet Ovid. As the title of the book-length poem would suggest, Ovid's Metamorphosis is about change, which certainly happens in his story of the origins of humans, which comes from Greek mythology. The title of the story below is Gaia, the poetic version of the name of the female deity who personified the earth for the ancient Greeks. Her actual name was Ge. Her name survives appropriately in the word geology, the study of the earth, and in other words that begin with geo. Gaia. In the beginning there was chaos, the abyss. Out of it first emerged Gaia, the earth, which is the foundation of all. Next came Tartaros, the depth in the earth where condemned dead souls go to their punishment, and Eros, the love that overwhelms bodies and minds, and Erebos, the darkness, and Nyx, the night. Erebos and Nyx made love, and from their union came Aether. the air, and Hemera, the day. Gaia, the divine personification of the earth, gave birth to 3 offspring without any sexual concourse. Gaia's first such child was Uranus, the starry heavens that fit around her perfectly and that provide a home for the immortals. Then she gave birth to the mountains, where the nymphs live in the hills and the forests. Then she gave birth to Pontos, the sea on which sailors challenge the raging waves. Then Gaia lay with Uranus, the heavens, and she gave birth to Okeanos, the ocean, and circles the world. Thus, in 3 generations, from chaos in the first to Gaia, Tartaros, Eros, Erebos, and Nyx in the second, and to Aether, Hemera, Uranus, Pontos, and Okeanos in the third, the entire world as we know it came to be. Gaia and Uranus went on to have 12 children, known as the Titans, and Gaia gave rise to many others as well. Uranus, loathing all these children, would push them back into Gaia, who suffered horribly with the pressure. Gaia created flint, and from it she made a sickle, and she urged her sons to use the sickle on their father. The youngest of the 12 Titans, Kronos, took the sickle, and when Uranus came to lie down with Gaia, Kronos cut off his father's genitals and threw them in the sea. From the resulting sea foam came Aphrodite, the goddess of love, the only Olympian god not descended from a Titan. The 12 children of Gaia and Uranus, the 12 Titans, intermarried and had many children, and from them grandchildren as well. Among the Titans, Kronos, who had emasculated his father Uranus, became the ruler and mated with his sister Rhea. Because Gaia and Uranus had prophesied that Kronos would be unseated by one of his children, Kronos swallowed the children that Rhea bore, who were Poseidon, Hades, Hestia, Demeter, and Hera. To foil Kronos, Rhea gave birth to their next child, Zeus, in secret and kept him hidden. She bound up a stone in a cloth and gave it to Kronos, who swallowed the stone, thinking it was the next of the children that he sought to contain. When Zeus was grown, he and Gaia conspired to make Kronos vomit up the 5 elder siblings of Zeus. Zeus, son of Kronos, went on to lead his siblings in a great struggle against the Titans, in a war that lasted 10 years until finally the 12 Titans were defeated and confined to Tartarus. Zeus and his siblings and their offspring went on to be the Olympian gods who rule the world today from Mount Olympus. It is to them that we make our sacrifices, to seek their favor or appease their wrath with our humble offerings of barley, meat, and wine. It is for them that we hold the athletic contests known as the Pythian Games that honor Apollo, the Isthmian Games that honor Poseidon, and the Nemean and Olympic Games that honor Zeus. Prometheus, one of the Titans, made the first humans from clay, and he brought them fire from Mount Olympus. However, Zeus, as king of the gods and no friend of Prometheus, became disgusted with the behavior of humans. He and his brother Poseidon caused rains to fall and rivers to flood, so that all of the humans would be drowned. However, Zeus finally saw one blameless couple huddled in a boat trying to ride out the flood, and eventually he decided they could survive. These 2 survivors were Deucalion, a son of Prometheus, and Phaera, a son of Epimetheus and Pandora. When the little boat bearing Deucalion and Phaera came to rest in the muddy and mossy landscape, they decided that they must consult the oracle of the Titan goddess Themis to see what they should do, alone in this strange world. Themis told them, "Go forth from my temple, cover your heads, and throw your mother's bones over your shoulders." Phaera was horrified at the idea of committing this sacrilege to the spirit of her mother. Deucalion, similarly horrified and perplexed, pondered the words of the oracle and finally said, "Perhaps the oracle means our mother Gaia, the earth, and the bones of which she speaks are the stones of the earth." Neither Deucalion nor Phaera was sure that this was right, but they pulled their robes over their heads, picked up the stones, and threw them over their shoulders. After a bit, the stones slowly softened, and they began to change shapes, and eventually they took the form of humans and became human. Those transformed stones are the ancestors of the humans of today, and that is why we have the hardness and endurance that we possess, having come from the stones of our Mother Earth.